poverty mean from your lens, right? And most of the time, people think that poverty means that extreme state of lack of money, right? And being inferior in quality or insufficient in amount. People think that people who have poverty are those who are living in bad housing situations or in bad neighborhoods or do not have money to buy proper food or they eat unhealthily. But from an extended lens, I'd like you today to rethink about what poverty is, right? From a very extended lens, I call it poverty can either create a culture to 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 become really drastically bad, right? And impact people in nuanced ways. So when I talk about poverty from an extended lens and from a cultural lens, I'm talking about poverty of the mind, right? You have a mindset, a really poor mindset does not lift other people up or does not create solutions or cannot create or build innovative ideas or solutions. Or when you have poverty of the heart set, right? I mean, I say heart set, it is about kindness, empathy, compassion, love, right? Those are the kinds of poverty of someone can also undergo or inherit. And yes, Jason is back. So let me bring him on. Hi, Jason. Welcome back. This is much, much better. All right, finally.
I just had to switch to my phone because apparently my laptop doesn't like it. So
no worries. So Jason Hartwick is my guest for today on Culture Science Talk, and we're talking about poverty. So Jason, where are you coming live from? Which part of the world?
I'm in Central Ontario, Canada.
That's awesome. It's awesome. And Jason, we connected via Twitter. I discovered you via, is it Dad to Be Chat or via Andrea, right? Dad to Be Chat or another
Probably.
chat. I can't, yeah. And then we started talking about a lot of different things. And then something that I posted on Twitter and your response to it really captivated my attention. So and I loved how you just went deeper into poverty and inequality and equity. So that's why I was like, you know what, Jason needs to come live on Culture Science Talk. So just to get a little bit understanding of Jason. So I know that you shared that you've been involved with non-profit organization work. So from your experience, can you share your work with non-profit organizations and the kind of poverty that you have seen in these organizations?
Oh my goodness. Well, I really got started when I was working in community organizations. So I moved into a neighborhood that is extremely poverty stricken, and there was a lady that lived across the road from me that was starting a community garden. And I thought, well, that's a great thing. I mean, my grandfather had just passed away, and he was a horticulturalist. I mean, he taught horticulture in high school for a while. And so for me, it was really important to plant. That's always been something important to me. And from there, it just sort of, you can't get involved in one thing in the poverty, in the anti-poverty sector without getting involved in everything. And so I got involved in a startup called Blessings in a Backpack, which basically sends kids home on weekends with food in a backpack.
Oh, wow.
And then, yeah, it was really fun and cool. And I've done work with a couple organizations that they're tearing up a street to put in flood mitigation because we live where there's a lot of water. And excuse me. And so one of the things they wondered is, after we tear up the street and put the flood stuff underneath, what do we want the street to look like afterwards? And there's a lot of poverty along that street. So there was a lot of, getting out into the community and asking questions and stuff like that. And 2 years ago, we lost someone who's very much a local poverty hero. She was this little old lady who always walked around with cloth bags full of like socks and hand warmers and, you know, stuff like that for people. And she just handed out to whoever needed it. And in her honor, we were trying to start a place where people who are homeless or who suffered from addiction or anything like that had a place to just go and hang out for a while. And, you know, we had coffee and food and people to talk to. And it was just sort of an open space kind of a concept. And yeah, we had that open for a few months, and then we sort of got kicked out because what we refer to as NIMBYism. So the NIMBY is an acronym for not in my backyard. And that's just these people that look at the homeless and say, well, I don't want to have to look at that.
Interesting. And that's the mindset that a lot of people have, right? It's like, I don't want to look at that, and they make it become invisible, right? Just because when people with privilege or with power make it become invisible does not mean that it is no longer there, right? And I want to highlight this important point that you just mentioned. You mentioned that it's a poverty-stricken road, and this lady was trying to give hand warmers to everyone, hand warmers and blankets, you say. But that act itself, right? That act itself, it is kindness, it's abundance, right? We often feel like poverty is, we look down on people who do not have the money, who do not live in good neighborhoods, or whose homes do not look or cater to the status quo, right? Like the mansions that that you see in LA, or the mansions that you see in what's it called? What's the town called? Toronto City, right?
Yeah.
These high-rise buildings. But the thing is that poverty is truly the absence of kindness, empathy, compassion, love, poverty of the mind, poverty of the heart, right? If people like that lady who went around, distributing hand warmers and blankets, if people with kindness and empathy are not present, I think poverty takes ultimate low. And poverty of the mindsets of the people who say that I don't want this to be in my backyard, I don't want to see this in my backyard, right? That's poverty. Just because you have money, just because you have an expensive house does not mean that you are rich, you're successful, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah. It's I guess depends on how you define success,
right?
My definition of success isn't necessarily the person who can amass the most amount of colored paper.
Yes. Okay, let's talk about success.
Not a common view.
Let's talk about success now. This is a common topic that I've been seeing. It's trending everywhere, right? What does success look like? And people are defining what success should be. I see this on LinkedIn. I see this on Instagram. I see this on social media. But success, like you said, to your point, it looks differently. But I want to hear your point of view. What does success look like to you?
Honestly, I'm not sure that I have a definition of success, because one of the things that I guess, if nothing else, poverty certainly teaches you is that there's no destination in life. It's a journey. You carry on through it rather than trying to get somewhere. And as long as you're doing your best to treat other people as though they're people, and as long as you have people that you can be close to, you're already successful. It isn't a goal. It's a part of the journey, is the success of being a good person.
I love that. You said that, it's not like an end goal, right? This is where I'm going to go and that's it. The journey does not end. The journey continues. That is so true, because when we talk about success, I've had so many people like define the term success, and they say that, in order to be successful, you need to wake up at 5 a.m. In order to be successful, you need to only associate yourself with people who are successful. But what does that look like? right? Like if a person who's trying to lose weight go to the gym and lose 40 pounds, are they supposed to associate? Whom are they supposed to associate with, right? Not everyone can wake up at 5 a.m. and we are discounting that whole point. We're discounting the point that everybody's body and internal clock works differently. Not everyone can wake up at 5 a.m. and can be sharp and focus sharply at 5 a.m., right? I focus really well from 10 a.m. all the way till 2 p.m. or 3 p.m. And that's it. After 3 p.m., I'm thinking about tea time and what foods that I should be eating. And the whole notion of success, like if you make $1 million, if you live in this expensive house, I feel that that's all bullshit. And that contributes to corroding a culture or corroding how a community is supposed to be built.
And a big part of that too is the fact that that kind of success, when people say I'm successful, to be quite honest, if you made $1 million in business somewhere, you probably made that $1 million on the back of the labor of others. So who was actually the successful one in any terms of doing something, right? Because
right.
What you were successful truly at, most likely, not everybody, but most likely what you were truly successful at is exploiting somebody else's labor. So is it, I mean, to me, it doesn't seem like success if it was somebody else's actions that caused it.
I like what you mentioned, exploiting someone else, right? And exploitation is also, I feel that it's a form of poverty. Poverty as in like when you exploit someone else, that's poverty of your mindset.
Absolutely.
And I look at exploiting as capitalism, in one form of capitalism. And exploitation comes in many formats where people who work in corporations, right, where they put in 40 to 100 hours a week, and their annual salary is what, $60,000 to $80,000 or $100,000, or not. Some people don't even get that much of money, but they are forced to work 100 hours a week, and that's exploitation. And when you actually do the maths, right, you take, let's say, $65,000 a year, divide by 12 months, divided by 100 hours times 4 weeks, that reduces to like what, $10 an hour or so. That's exploitation.
Like that, yeah.
That's exploit.
And then you look at these CEOs who make these billions of dollars, and people look at them and say, well, they're the successful one. How? What did they do last week to justify having that kind of money?
Mm-hmm.
And I mean,
okay. You hear me? Okay, no, we're back. All right. No, that's so true. I was going to say that is so true. Like when some people say that, when you make X number of money or X amount of money, you're truly successful. And to your point, what did they do to make that much of money, right? It's not like the machine is only able to run with all different components. Without those components, you can't get the higher point. It's like going up a stairs, right? A stairs, it's not like a ladder. It's at an incline. If without the help of the incline, you can't climb up the stairs to get to the top in order to see the bird's eye view. So I'm with you as to, what are they doing in order to be successful? And if we're gauging or using a barometer to gauge someone else's success based on their dependence on someone else, that then challenges the whole question of what success is.
Well, exactly. And I mean, you hear all the time, what you hear is, if you work hard, then you can be successful in the system of capitalism we have. I grew up, my first 18 years, I was a farmer. I was a mover for 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
You're not ever going to convince me that hard work is how you get to the top in capitalism.
Mm-hmm.
I worked my butt off, and no, I never made it to the top of nothing.
Mm-hmm. And that's reality, right? These are all the invisible things that needs to become visible, because nowadays when we talk about success or building a culture or anything of that sort, right, people say, oh, you need to work your butt off, it's hard work. Then we need to redefine what hard work is, right? Are we looking at hard work from a very singular lens, where hard work nowadays with technology is everyone, it's so easy for someone to like, I'm going online, I'm going to do my e-commerce. That's hard work. Sitting in front of a computer, staring for 8 to 10 hours or 16 hours, trying to set up this online store or building a startup, a technology startup, that's hard work. That is hard work. Yes, I'm not disregarding that, but also we need to rethink about what is hard work. What are other forms of hard work? Like you said, you're a farmer, you're a mover. Those are all hard work. It's hard work, and how can you compare? How can you even compare that someone is not being successful or someone is not being hardworking? And you can't compare like apples to oranges, because both of them are two different fruits.
And that's definitely a conversation that happens a lot within anti-poverty work, because people are constantly, and addictions too. The big thing is people like to say, well, I used to have this problem and I did this and now I'm here. And if I can do it, you can do it. And constantly I say to people, you know what, when I was younger, I was a farmer. My first 18 years of my life, I've spent hours and hours in hayfields. So we'll go out tomorrow. You come with me. We'll go out tomorrow. We'll work in a hayfield. You will be running on a hay wagon from the baler to the back, and you will have to stack all of that hay, and you will pick up every bale of hay, and you will have to put it in a stack. I've done it. I can do it. If I can do it, anybody can do it. That's deposit, right? And so to me, it's more a matter of, everybody has different abilities. And, if you can't keep up to me in that hayfield, you have to acknowledge everybody has different abilities. Not everybody is capable of the exact same thing as everybody else. And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But it also means you can't place your own expectations for yourself on other people.
I love this. Oh my God, I feel like clapping. No, really, you highlighted two very important points, Jason. You mentioned about not everyone has got the same level of skills, right? Everyone has got unique strengths and skills, right? And that's so true. And expectations, you can't put that expectations on someone else, the same kind of expectations. And that's what is lacking nowadays in terms of poverty of the mindset, right? We are not willing to accept and truly understand that everyone is built differently. Everyone has got a different skill set. Everyone has got different amounts of strengths, right? Just because someone has got an MBA does not mean that they'll do really well, as opposed to someone who has seen what poverty is like from a very young age and worked themselves up through, not through technology, but being anything that is off the mainstream, like being a farmer or being movers. And then some people grow up, like when I say grow up, like they move up and define a different form of success. And that's so important. We are forgetting to even embrace that everyone is different. We have this false sense of expectation that we impose onto other people, and I love speaking about expectation, because people think that expectation, expectation comes from a place of ego, right? From a place of ego. Absolutely. Because when we want to work with other people, we need to respect the other person as a human, the other person we have to acknowledge that the other person has got a beating heart. They have got emotions as well, and they have got their own set of skills and strengths, and we have got to accept accept that they are showing up as they are at the stage that they are. And having those expectations kind of like destroys, I feel that it destroys relationships. It destroys the ability to build someone else up. So I know that you've worked with non-profit organizations, and you have done hard labor from being a farmer to being a mover, and working with startup and non-profit organizations, and you've done anti-poverty work. So how does expectation look like when you come with a mindset of abundance as opposed to a mindset of, no, this is going to be scarcity?
The only expectation I ever place on people is an expectation that they come with a mind that's at least willing to learn. And maybe you have, I mean, a lot of people grew up with parents who had come into their adulthood in particularly the 1950s and 1960s. That was a time of economic abundance and economic growth, and the economy was booming along, and there were industrial jobs everywhere. And so that was a time when you could work hard, and it was easy to find work because there was work everywhere. And so a lot of people were brought up by parents who had grown up in that time, and so they have those expectations that it's still like that. So it's understandable that people come with expectations of certain things and certain behaviors and things like that. And so, but if you can come to the table with the understanding that maybe I'm wrong, maybe the way I was brought up, maybe it's not entirely correct. And if you can, if you're at least willing to listen, right? I mean, I obviously I'm fairly good at explaining poverty, and I have a lot of experience in listening and talking to people who live in it and what their experiences have been and how they got there, and what they've tried to get out of it and how that didn't work and why that didn't work. So if I can sit down at the table with someone who's willing to say, okay, this is how I feel about the economy and work and social services and even things like capitalism and socialism. But if you can sit down and you're willing to say, maybe those things aren't exactly the way it has to be, that's really the only expectation I have for anybody, to be willing, or I don't know, is there a better way to say this? I was having this conversation with someone last night, and he continued to say, I want freedom. He was a libertarian. I get it. I understand what you're trying to say, but what do you mean by freedom? And he said, well, what do you mean? I can't explain freedom. How do you explain freedom? I said, okay, well, look at it this way. If you have the freedom to do whatever you want, and someone else has the freedom to do whatever they want, what if they decide that what they want is you to work on their farm? And he says, well, I'll just have a big enough gun to ensure that can happen. And I said, okay, but what if his gun's bigger, or he has 5 friends who agree with him being the one in charge, and he enforces his freedom to choose on you? Now what? Well, I'd rather die than not have freedom. And I'm like, but you're, like that conversation is hard to have with somebody who just goes back to, this is the way I think, and I think that way because it's right, and that's just the way to think. Right. Well, try explaining what you're talking about and listening to somebody else's point of view and taking it in a way that, at least you can counter what they're saying. I love debate. I love it, as long as that's what it is, and not just, I'm standing here and you're standing there, and we're just going to stand here and say, well, I want this, and you're saying I want that, but nobody's actually talking about why, or the, what's behind what you're saying. There's sorry.
No, go ahead.
There's a guy even here, he's from Toronto, and him and I are very simpatico on a lot of issues. The one that we don't is basic income. And always there's this back and forth. Like we sometimes in the comments on our Facebooks, we will get into writing practically blog posts back and forth. But it's because both of us understand what we're saying and we are listening to each other. We just disagree about it. And that's okay.
Right. And you highlight a very important point as to, you mentioned about freedom, right? And imposing someone else's freedom onto you. That's such an important point, right? And what does freedom look like to you? Freedom to you can look differently. If you want freedom of, abundance of money, or freedom of speech, right? Freedom of being able to do what you want, like the child wanting to have freedom living in their parents' home, or right, or someone working in a corporation where wanting to have the freedom to do what they want to do and not always be micromanaged by their managers. Or what does freedom look like for immigrants in a country, right, where they so freedom.
You hit a hot button right there.
Right. I mean, it looks so differently to so many of us. What does freedom look like? And you're so right. I used to live in Seattle. Where it's extreme liberalism, and there's nothing wrong with that. But it's also about, I understood the more I lived there for what, two and a half years, 2 to 3 years. And I found that people were not willing to accept. They wanted freedom in different forms, right? Freedom of speech, freedom to marry whomever that they wanted. But if I disagreed with something and I was invited to go join a rally and a march, and I said, you know what? I'm not feeling like it. I don't believe in marching. I believe in approaching this matter in a very different way. And I have the freedom to express what I want to express, right? And
Exactly.
it was not accepted in a very positive manner. And in response to that, I was told, you are an immigrant, you're going to get kicked out, so you better be on our side. So to use that, right, to use that against me, I feel that was, you can't, to your point, I agree with that. To use your freedom and your expectations of what freedom looks like to you from your lens and impose it on me, and looking at me as a lesser human just because I'm an immigrant, I think that was just not right. That was actually taking away my freedom as a human, right? My freedom to practice free speech, my freedom to be in a country where I thought I was accepted, but apparently I wasn't accepted in that space.
And that's, I mean, it's kind of a whole other discussion, right? About the idea of government and my biggest thing about, because sort of what you're talking about there is libertarianism, right? And that movement or even anarchy, which I have a friend who is very much an anarchist and believes that there doesn't need to be government. And my question about those things always is, and even that, like I said, that guy I was talking to last night, he said, we don't need government, we just need the Bill of Rights. And I said, okay, that's fine, but who enforces that? Where does the enforcement for that come? As a society, as civilized human beings, we need to have that organization, that sort of overarching organization. Now, in a lot of ways, that has collapsed in most of the world to a point where, I mean, I hate to say it, but particularly in the United States, it's to only have the choice between the capitalists and the uber capitalists is like, where's your choice there? It isn't, and so I get why there's a lot of movement against the idea of government, because so many of them have this idea that, well, we have to keep doing things the way we are doing them. We just have to tweak it a little bit. And that's just not the way it is, right? Like there is massive change that needs to be done. And I mean, one of the things that I advocate for an awful lot is the idea of a basic income.
Mm-hmm.
And excuse me. And you know, that is a complete shift in the way we think about taking care of each other, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because it's a shift from this idea that, well, you only get help if you deserve it, to everybody deserves help. And this is the bottom line that we're going to force people to live at. And that's a completely different way from the way we look at things now, right? Is this idea that, because right now it's kind of like, well, you have to prove that you're a worthy human being in order to even have enough to have a place to live, to have clothing on your back, to have food in your belly. And so I mean, since probably the 60s especially, there's been this movement against the idea of socialism. It doesn't have to look like communism. It doesn't have to be control of the government by everything, and everyone else just gets whatever scraps are left over. It can look like it can look like capitalism, just done in a different way that means nobody suffers.
That's a really good point, right? And you highlighted so many different things, How socialism and how governments, how governing goes on, and I feel that whatever happens in a nation, it's transferred. That behavior, that kind of practice, is transferred into communities, right? And the same kind of practice gets transferred again into workplaces, in organizations, in businesses, in corporations, in religious practices. That becomes like a circular practice that never ends. It's like people are so conditioned to think this is what is happening in the nation, so it's acceptable. This is what is happening in our religious congregation, so it's acceptable. This is how it's going to be done, or it is being done in community practices, or even in homes, right? That's why even in homes, the way that we lead, the way that we build a culture, the way that we even interact with our family members or even relatives, right? When they come over for Christmas or Thanksgiving or whatever festival that anyone celebrates, there's always going to be, oh, you're different from me. It's okay to be different, but at the same time, to your point that you mentioned, I want to understand where you are coming from, right? Without listening to where you're coming from, I will not be able to understand where you're coming from as you are. I'll not be able to understand your struggles, the things that you are seeing from your lens. And that allows us to, rethink the kind of expectations that we have. And of course, we're all conditioned. The way that we think, the way that we behave, the way that we speak. And conditioning is just not from the media. It's not from the news that we get the information. It's from everything. I see you like, I want to hear your thoughts.
Yep. Oh, absolutely. I mean, one of the hardest things, and you sort of touched on this, one of the things we see a lot, particularly in North America, is this idea of immigrants or any sort of racism. And a lot of that is taught. Certainly it's not, it is in human nature to some degree to look at somebody different and say, oh, they're different than me. But it's not really within human nature to translate that immediately into hate. But it's taught, right? I mean, there was a time when even to avoid the whole black and white question, there was a time when Irish people who are white have always been, they're some of the whitest people on the planet, in fact. But there was a time when Irish people were looked down on in that same way. They were looked at as lesser than. They were looked at as not even human beings. Some of the first slaves that came to North America were actually Irish people. And nowadays, people think it's ridiculous to think that was ever a separation that was made, but it absolutely was. But it was taught, right? Like it was intentionally taught. And that goes back even to Roman times when they claimed that the Druids killed people and ate them, right? It's always been that idea that if I make them look worse, I look better. But it has to be taught, right? And so we don't just learn things from, the media plays a big part in it now, because of course the lifeblood of capitalism is, what's the word I'm looking for? Wow, advertising. But how do you use that word?
It happens.
But it's not just that. You learn a lot from your parents, from your friends, and the thing is that, sometimes these ideas that are so incredibly pervasive, you don't even know where they come from. You have no idea, but they're everywhere. Like this idea that that money is necessary, that capitalism is so wonderful. That was intentionally taught in the 60s. You think back to particularly McCarthyism, right? That idea that, well, communism is bad and communism is bad. That wasn't even necessarily anything against communism. It was just to make sure that everybody supported the idea that we have to have money in order to be good people, right? To ensure that people were forced to work.
Right. Right. No, you are so right. And especially to the point where you mentioned about, racism, and sometimes it's really hard for people to talk about it. It's because it's a learned behavior. You're so right. I recall being in the playground, growing up in different parts of the world, being in the playground. I didn't look at someone else who looked different from me as, oh, you're different. I didn't feel that way until I started going to schools. And even in schools, they teach about this culture is different, that culture is different. Like the education system promotes that. I feel like under the vehicle or illusion of cultural tolerance, or trying to be culturally linguistic, right? But I feel that in order to be culturally linguistic, you shouldn't focus on the differences, right? These people do it certain way, these people do it certain way. But culture and traditions are man-made. They have been passed down generations by generations, unchallenged, unquestioned, right? Like people do practices, like even religion. I feel like religion, people have used religion to take control over a group of people, right? And I'm not saying anything bad about religion. Religion is great if you practice it to have like a clarity and to just give you a sense of peace of mind. That's fantastic. But it gets dangerous when we recruit people and force them to think similarly about other people. Or I'll say, I was nothing about Christianity. My dad was Catholic. But I've been in supermarkets where people look at me and they'll just say, "Oh, Muslims are really evil," and then I'm like, and they'll look directly at me because I'm tan skin, and I'm thinking I'm not even Muslim, and even if I'm not Muslim, that's such a hate comment to make.
Well, and the really hilarious part to me about that, and it does go back to the idea that everyone should be more understanding. Because I'm not any particular religion at all. If the Christians, the Muslims, and the Jewish people actually sat down and discussed religion, what they might come to the realization of is they all worship the same God. Jewish people are still waiting for the first coming. The Christians are waiting for the second coming, and the Muslims believe that Jesus was just another prophet. They're the same religion.
That's true.
It never fails to amuse me how angry Christians get at Muslims. They're the same religion. They just don't believe he was the Messiah. They believe he was a prophet. Why is that a reason to be so angry with one another?
Right. And this is the gap. This is the biggest gap that we are missing. And people, trying to segregate themselves by saying, I'm different because I practice this. I'm different because I believe in this. Regardless of what you practice. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I just, there is an important thing there though, is they're not trying to say I'm different because I practice this. They're trying to say I'm better because I practice this. I'm better than you because I'm a Christian. I'm better than you because I'm a this.
Mm-hmm.
That's saying I'm different isn't a problem. People are different. That's the way it works.
Right. Great point.
But saying I'm better than you because I'm different from you, that's the problem. That's where the problem comes.
Yeah, and to your point, when people say segregate themselves and say I'm better than you, but the biggest gap is when you segregate yourselves through expectations or by saying I'm better than you, or just having your imposed freedom onto someone else, right? You're creating the segregation where you are disregarding someone else as a fellow human. You are disregarding the opportunity to learn about someone else. You're disregarding the opportunity to build a new culture that evolves to a point where you want to embrace everyone and really recognize at the core, everyone wants to be loved. At the core, everyone wants to have a sense of acceptance. At the core, everyone wants a hug. Don't tell me you don't want a hug.
Oh, and hey, nowadays people are starting to figure that out, I think, a little bit. Everybody wants a hug and nobody can have one right now.
Right. Especially in quarantine, right? In quarantine. And
exactly.
I was thinking about this yesterday, right? During quarantine, people are realizing that they have not seen their families, right, in 6 weeks. Sometimes I know people who are separated from their families in different countries. I live in the United States. My mom lives in a different country. And I didn't get the privilege of flying back and forth, right? And people used to tell me, oh, you can always FaceTime and you can talk. I've been living in the US for like 16 and a half years, coming to 17 years now. I didn't have the privilege to go fly back and forth seeing my family. And now people are realizing I didn't get the privilege to hug my mom. I did not have the privilege to go to my dad's funeral. I didn't have the privilege to go to my sister's wedding. I didn't have all those privileges. And now people being quarantined, they are having that anger and that realization that I need to see my family. This is ridiculous. Lift the lockdown, lift the quarantine. We are people, we need love. I need to hug. I want to go see my parents. And I want people to realize, look at that from an extended lens and as to how you see and how that there's displacement, right? How other people are being treated as to immigrants being locked down or immigrants at the border, separated from their family, right? The human. Go ahead.
And I was just going to add to that also, people that live in poverty.
Yeah.
The one of the big things is people who now here we call it OW, which is Ontario Works, and ODSP, which is Ontario Disability Supplement Program or something like that. But it's for disabled people, right? And neither of those are at a level that allows us to have money beyond the last day of the month, because it comes in at the last day of the month. You pay your rent, you go grocery shopping, that's it, you're done. And for a long time, people, like, of course I have to talk locally, right? For a long time, we've been saying, these rates need to be raised. I want to be able to go out for a coffee on the 17th of the month. They're like, well, coffee, that's a luxury. Why should taxpayers have to pay for you to go out for a cup of coffee? And something I've been talking about through this whole quarantine thing is, it doesn't seem so silly now, does it? Because for people that live on those social assistance programs, this is 3 weeks out every month, every single month. This is 3 weeks out of the month for us, because we've only got enough to live for about a week. And that's it. That the rest of the 3 weeks, we're at home. We can't go out anywhere. We can't do anything. We can't go to the store. We can't go out for coffee. We can't go and sit with our friends because nobody has the money to share.
Mm-hmm.
And that's even from that lens, it's like, people, like, you think this is so terrible. It's been 4 weeks for you. For those of us that live like this every day, we like 3 weeks out every month is lockdown for us.
Mm-hmm.
How do you think we feel? Where this is what we've been talking about for all these years.
Yes. No, you highlighted such a drastic point, right? It's like quarantine, the lockdown, right? When we look at it from a different lens, from a lens of what really poverty is, right? Poverty also dehumanizes someone, right? And it portrays a dehumanizing lens or perception onto people who are not experiencing it, right? And you're so right. During this quarantine, the privileges that I had, right? And people who have a car, who have the ability to jump in their car, drive whenever that they want, wherever that they want. Rethink about people who do not have a car, who do not have that privilege, right? Who depend on public transportation or who depend on bicycles, right? Compare those comparisons, those privileges. You still have the privilege to jump into your car and go, but what about those people during this quarantine who depend on public transportation? How are they surviving?
Yeah, luckily the city here that I live in, they made, one of the first things they did was made public transportation free.
Mm-hmm.
Completely free. They have kept it running. It's on a limited schedule now, but they have kept it running, and it's been free. And all they did was they've made people walk in through the back door so as not to make the bus drivers. I mean that, but still, I mean, someone said the other day, well, I don't know why my wife won't let me take public transportation to work. There's only like 6 people on the bus. Yeah, okay, but do you know the COVID history of those other 6 people on the bus? Right, and that's it got him thinking. He's like, you know what? I never really thought of it that way. Well, you know what? I live with somebody who has COPD. That puts her at a high risk for this. So I constantly run through my mind all the time, who have we been in contact with? Where have they been? I know, we have been so very careful about keeping our circle very, very small because I don't want my wife to die. It's that simple.
Right. No, absolutely. And those are the kind of mindset that we need to become more conscious about, right? Like, and in a lot of cities, even taking public transportation, right? There's smaller towns. People think taking public transportation is for the poor or for people who can't afford their own cars. But if you really rethink it, public transportation in large cities, right, it is to promote an affordable and sustainable way of getting around. It is to reduce carbon footprint. It is to reduce whatever air pollution that we are contributing. Right? People often think like poverty is like so singular. It is one kind of people, one kind of group, and you highlighted from the get-go, Jason, is like we really need to start listening to people where we think that, oh, I don't want to see that in my backyard. I don't want to see that. People are not working hard. You're not working hard. We really need to rethink as to why are these solutions not working? Because one diet does not make everyone lose 50 pounds, right? Some people can eat cake and steak every day and they'll lose 50 pounds. That will not work for the same person with a different kind of a body makeup, right? Because we all don't have the same kind of digestive system, metabolism rate. So we really need to rethink, going back to your point again, listening to someone as to why the solutions did not work for them really helps us to really shift that mindset from our own mindset, right? The poverty-stricken mindset of not listening, poverty-stricken mindset of not having kindness, not having empathy, not wanting to listen and really find solutions together that works for the other person to lift them up. Really, really works. It was such a pleasure having you today on live Twitter to talk about culture. And culture is a huge part, right? And poverty is such a huge part in the culture that we create, but that we live in. And it is up to us to change the mindset. Thank you for coming on board and sharing your experiences, your life experiences, your insight. It's always a pleasure having you on live chats, whether on video or just on Twitter.
When it works. Well, thank you for having me.
No, thank you for coming on board.